Bernardo versus People, GR number 182210, October 2015. This is for criminal procedure, specifically on Rule 111, Prosecution of Civil Action. Subtopic, Rule on Implied Institution of Civil Action with Criminal Action. Note that independent civil liabilities survive death and an action for recovery therefore may be generally pursued but only upon filing a separate civil action and subject to the rules on criminal procedure as amended. Upon the death of the accused, the independent civil liability based on a contract which is deemed instituted in the criminal case for Batas Pambansa bilang 22 may still be enforced against the estate. Facts of the case. This case was about the death of the accused pending her appeal, where her independent civil liability based on a contract which was deemed instituted in the criminal case for BP 22 was enforced against her heirs. This was an original case for 5 counts of violation of BP 22 filed by private complainant Carmencita C. Bumanglag against petitioner Paz T. Bernardo. Petitioner obtained a loan from the private complainant as evidenced by a promissory note. Petitioner issued post-dated checks, but said checks were dishonored and the petitioner failed to pay the said loan despite demands. Both the Regional Trial Court and the Court of Appeals found the petitioner guilty beyond reasonable doubt of 5 counts of violation of BP 22. Pending appeal at the Supreme Court, petitioner died. Hence, the Supreme Court required Bernardo's heirs to appear as her substitute in her petition for purposes of Bernardo's civil liability. The heirs of the petitioner argued that Bernardo's death extinguished her civil liability. In the alternative, they contended that any civil liability should be settled in a separate civil case. Issue: whether Bernardo's death extinguished her civil liability. Ruling: no. Bernardo's death did not extinguish her civil liability. The Supreme Court said that as a general rule, the death of an accused pending appeal extinguishes her criminal liability and the corresponding civil liability based solely on the offense. However, the independent civil liability survived death and an action for recovery therefore may be generally pursued but only by filing a separate civil action and subject to Section 1, Rule 111 of the Rules on Criminal Procedure as amended. This separate civil action may be enforced against the estate of the accused. In this case, the offense charged was violation of BP 22. In such cases, the criminal action shall be deemed to include the corresponding civil actions. Instead of instituting 2 separate cases, only a single suit is filed and tried. This rule was enacted to help the clogged court dockets, which had been packed with BP 22 because creditors used the courts as collectors. As a necessary consequence of this special rule, the civil liabilities arising from the issuance of a worthless check are deemed instituted in a case for violation of BP 22. Nevertheless, the death of Bernardo did not automatically extinguish the action. The independent civil liability based on contract, which was deemed instituted in the criminal action for BP 22, may still be enforced against her estate in the present case. Therefore, Bernardo's death did not extinguish her civil liability. As to the heir's contention that any civil liability should be settled in a separate civil case, the Supreme Court observed that it would be costly, burdensome, and time consuming to dismiss the case at hand and require the private complainant to file a separate civil action. In applying the foregoing, the Supreme Court determined Bernardo's civil liability and ordered her to pay the private complainant.